Glad you're back with us here for the second hour of the Mark Cox Show. We are hoping to get a hold of Ann Wagner, the Congresswoman from the 2nd District, just a little later in this hour and get an update on what's going on with health care. We're going to give away a couple of tickets today. Now, every day this week it's been different. Today we're going to give away tickets to REO Speedwagon Sticks at the K-She Pig Roast. That's cool. It's coming up later this hour, and then we'll get you some flooding updates as well. Speaking of flooding, they've got a mess down in Eureka. I spoke to former House Speaker Tim Jones, the sandbagging effort they did around his building and some others there in the central part of downtown Eureka. It's holding so far. But the problem is the river crest is going to be right at or maybe a little above in some places the historic levels they saw in 2015. Now, we've had lots of rain over the years. Why is this just now becoming a huge problem in areas where it's not normally, hasn't historically been a huge problem? And that's a really good question. It's a question a lot of people have been asking. It's a question Tim Jones asked earlier in the week. And I've invited David Stokes to join us. He's with the Great Rivers Habitat Alliance. David, thanks for coming into the program.
Mark, it's great to be on News Talk 97.1 with you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming into the studio and all the rain and all that good stuff. This is probably an issue that didn't come as a great surprise to your organization.
Well, we've been talking for years. We were formed back in 2000 to combat floodplain development, and especially at the time in the St. Charles area. And we've seen it over and over throughout the Midwest, really. But let's just talk about our region, in the area of the confluence of the great rivers that we have meeting in St. Louis that define our region. And as we combine floodplain development, turning areas that Mother Nature intended for water to go into shopping centers and shopping malls, often subsidized by your tax dollars.
Chesterfield.
Combine that with too many levees on our rivers that channelize the rivers and make the floods larger when they do come. They protect the people right behind the levee, but they don't eliminate the threat. They just move the flood to the next place down the river or back it up the river. When you combine all these things with our own choices and our own actions, we're bringing about these floods to ourselves. Last night I flew over and I was in a helicopter checking out Eureka and Valley Park and Arnold, and you fly over this enormous landfill right in the heart of the Merrimack River floodplain in Valley Park that somehow somebody permitted to go in the middle of the floodplain within the last 2 decades. Why is it there? Who authorized it? It's sitting there right in the middle, obviously taking up so much space that was meant for water. And along with the new levee in Valley Park and so many developments throughout the region, that's why the Merrimack River has seen, I think this is going to rise to the level of the so-called 500-year flood. We've now had 500-year floods in 17 months.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. So here's part of my question, because somebody brought this up the other day. They said, well, Valley Park raised its dams, its levees several feet higher than the Corps of Engineers instructed them to. That is something I read in an article in the Post yesterday. And then my question was, if this is something that specifically part of the problem is what they did in Valley Park, they weren't successful because Valley Park still flooded, right? Parts of it still flooded.
Right, the part of Valley Park not protected by that
the levee, I guess,
have flooded.
Yeah.
The parts of the Valley Park that for some reason the federal government decided to fund a levee protecting parts of Valley Park about 25 years ago, and that part's still dry. But that levee, just like the levee, the floodplain development, it just creates problems worse elsewhere. There are other parts of Valley Park absolutely underwater right now, and the worst problem is when you engage in this process year after year, you take places in Eureka, all these businesses in Eureka, I feel so sorry for them, because many of them were responsibly built in areas that didn't expect to have floods. They weren't on the flood map. They thought, we can build here. This area doesn't get wet and floods. But we've, through our own development choices, so dramatically increased the height of the floods we get now. The water gets there faster. It can't stay in the floodplain. It has to go to the river because the floodplain's asphalt and concrete. Now, businesses that thought they were safe, residents' homes who thought they were safe, they're getting flooded out, and they don't have an ability to plan for this. They don't have the insurance on it. It's terrible.
I know. Is there any pushback for the cities that made the decision to build the levees higher, for example, like in Valley Park, let's assume, I'm just picking numbers out of my head. Let's assume they were supposed to build it to 35 feet above sea level, and they built it to 43, for example. Can the Corps of Engineers go out there and lower it? Is there any answer to this problem? Because we're not going to get. I mean, you're never the Chesterfield Valley is never going to be a floodplain again. It's just not. I mean, we've made permanent changes in some of these areas, and I don't know what the long-term answer is. Does Great Rivers have an option for that?
Well, it is a huge problem because the Corps of Engineers just completed a study, and both the Post-Dispatch and the Alton Telegraph have written about this over the past few weeks. They randomly picked 200 miles of levees north of St. Louis up to Iowa. And they found that of the 200 miles of randomly chosen levees, 40% of them, or 80 miles, were greater than 2 feet higher than authorized by the Corps. So they weren't even paying attention to the levees that were just 1 to 1.5 feet high.
Yeah.
They were just a little high. 40% of them are significantly higher than authorized. And the Army Corps of Engineers must enforce their regulations here. If you're not going to make people abide by the regulations, don't have the regulations at all.
Thank you.
Because they're useless.
Right.
So the Corps of Engineers has to force these levee districts, which are all these, in that case, up and down the Mississippi, these are local levee districts. So they're government agencies, but at the local level. And they've got to be compelled, but whatever it takes, to put those levees back to the authorized heights, because nobody else can plan or prepare for how they're going to respond to flooding, unless the ones that are approved are at the heights they've been approved for. Now, Valley Park is a slightly different story because that's a Corps level, and we paid for the study that found that the levee was higher than authorized.
Okay.
The Corps does, in part, dispute those findings. We stand by our findings, and we hope that the Corps of Engineers will go back in, take it seriously, and lower some parts of that levee to its authorized heights as well.
So I'm not an engineer, and I'll ask this question. Maybe it's a naive question. I assume there's no chance that any of these levees were built higher unintentionally. I mean, the suggestion here is that these communities realize, well, they let us go to this height, but if we pile 2 or 3 more feet of dirt on there, we're going to be that much safer. Is that effectively what happened?
That's the levee wars that have been going on in this country for years. And in a levee war, just what it sounds like. One city builds a levee high, so the next city thinks, well, they're going to send the water over to me. We've got to build our levee even higher. And it's just this never-ending cycle. And that would be a bad response to the floods we're seeing now. And I'm actually hearing this a little bit on social media, that people saying maybe it's time for the Merrimack Dam to be built. That was the dam that was killed in the 1970s that was proposed for that area. Or maybe Pacific and Fenton and Arnold should get levees just like Valley Park got a levee. That would cost an enormous amount of taxpayer dollars and would just make the problem worse. The flooding is worse now than it used to be because of our man-made actions. The academics who look at this, it's nothing indirect. Global warming may play a part in this, but it's far more direct. We're building in the floodplain. We're building in the areas that Mother Nature intended for water to go. We're paving it over. We're channelizing the rivers, and 5 people are dead. So that's what it comes down to. 5 people are dead from flooding so far. Homes and businesses are destroyed. We're bringing this upon ourselves, and we have to stop. We have to change our policy.
I don't want to think that ship has sailed. But maybe going forward, like for example, I know recently, and you can tell me if your group was one of the ones involved in this, there was an effort in Maryland Heights to prevent more building in the floodplain down there. I know it's an issue and a discussion going forward, certainly, but we've ignored this for so many years. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day, but my family and I took a ride on the Katy Trail, and we're going along some bluffs, and I'm looking at these where this river used to flow through here years ago up to the side of it. And I'm looking how far away the bluffs are on the other side. And I'm thinking, it's unbelievable to me how much this river has changed course in however many millions of years that was since the water was there. We've had a very short-sighted view of river management in this country, haven't we?
Absolutely, Mark. And to answer your question, yes, we were involved in opposing the Maryland Heights floodplain development, where Stan Kroenke last year wanted to put a big proposal there. The good news is that proposal is not going forward. The bad news is that Maryland Heights right now is trying to just solve some some stormwater control issues in the area. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But they want to do that just so that they can then develop the area. So if people are thinking about this, up in Lincoln County right now, there's a proposal called the Port of Lincoln, right just north of the Quiver River. The Quiver River, which blew out bridges the other day. It overflowed its banks like crazy. There's a proposal there to take 7,000 acres of wetlands and farmland and open space and turn it into the area's latest cargo distribution center for barges and trucks and trains. 7,000 acres of asphalt and concrete right along the Mississippi, just north of the Quiver. And where do those people think that water's going to go?
Right.
What do they think they're going to do to create the next flood even worse? We're repeating this over and over, and we have to stop. And we didn't learn the lesson of 1993. The lesson we did learn was that 2 years after the flood fills the Chesterfield Valley, we can make that the world's biggest outdoor shopping mall.
Yeah.
It's time for us to learn the real lesson for responsible local choices. Don't build in the floodplain anymore. And when you can fix things by lowering improperly high levees or other changes, we have to do that too. It's imperative. And people can follow us at Facebook page, Great Rivers Habitat Alliance, a website, grha.org. Follow me on Twitter at David C. Stokes.
Yeah, David, let me ask one last question. Hypothetically, if 18 months ago after the last flood, somebody had gone in and lowered these levees to the level that the Corps approved, would Eureka have still flooded this time? I'm talking about specifically the ones in Valley Park. Do you believe that would have relieved enough pressure, or is that just part of the problem?
That's part of the problem. Now, From what I saw flying over it last night, I will say that this landfill, which stands out like I think the phrase sore thumb would understate it, which sticks out with the enormous space it takes up right in the middle of the floodplain. I would say, hypothetically, of course, no engineering proof, but if that landfill was not there and water was in the space beneath the flood that the landfill is taking up, then yes, the waters would be lower up and down the Merrimack. How much lower would they be? I cannot say, but that landfill is just devastating. And I think that the Valley Park levee, absolutely. Nobody wants to look at it and say, oh, those people in Valley Park, they should flood. But people got to understand, when you pick one area to protect for some reason, an area that Mother Nature wanted to send water in the first place, and you protect that, you're just sending that water to some place that Mother Nature didn't originally intend, and those people are even less prepared, and that's why it's wrong.
Not nice to fool Mother Nature. That's coming true this time. Well, it's a discussion to continue. Obviously, right now, we just got to deal with the fact that everything's flooded. We're hoping the waters go down, and this is the next discussion that people have to have in those communities, is what to do about this. David Stokes, thank you so much. He's with the Great Rivers Habitat Alliance, grha.org.
grha.org. And Mark, thank you for having me on your show today.
You bet. Great to meet you, David. I appreciate you coming in, and we're